As I mentioned at the beginning of today's service, up until Monday, I was on a 3-week vacation, and there was 3 major parts of my vacation. The very first started out right here on Kauai as a staycation, and the reason I decided to take this particular time of the year for vacation is because my son, who is working on his PhD in ecology at Columbia University in New York, and his girlfriend, that's also in the same program at the master's level, flew from London, where she's from, all the way to Kauai to spend some time with me. So of course I was going to take some time off and hang out with them. And Isabel had never been to Hawaii before, and it was just a wonderful time being able to be with the two of them. I met her in New York for a day when I was flying to Europe on my sabbatical last year. And then she actually, with Polani, came over and spent some time with me in France. And I think she was there for about 4 days. Just a delightful young woman, but it was really special to take about a week or so and just hang out with them and just enjoy her presence and learn more good things about her every day that I spent with her. The other thing that I did, the second part of vacation, was my niece, Anna Leilani, got married in Santa Cruz. And many of you have seen her dance before. She's a beautiful young woman, and she's also Polani's cousin that's the same age as him. And so they kind of, even though they lived in different states for most of their lives, they grew up spending time together every year. And they're the only 2 cousins on my side of the family, anyway, that are anywhere near in age. So Polani really wanted to go and invite Isabel and introduce her to Anna and the rest of the family. And I hadn't met Anna's fiance, or husband now, until 2 days before the wedding. And I definitely wanted to go make sure that this young man met my standards for this niece that I have, that I just thought, he better be very special. And he is, so I just wanted to report that back to you as well. But wonderful time in California with family and friends, and some friends I hadn't seen for decades. So it was a really special time. And then the third part of vacation was on Oahu, and I had a little business meeting event to attend to that took pretty much a whole day. That was for Pacific School of Religion, where I'm a trustee in the schools in Berkeley. But the main reason I hung out there for a week is last week on Saturday, my good friend John Tronus sang as the solo male vocalist at the Jim Workman concert in the big music concert hall, the Blaisdell in Honolulu. John and I were roommates freshman year in college. When I got married, John was the best man in my wedding, and I've seen John perform in, oh gosh, California, Texas, Utah, Minnesota, but I'd never heard him perform in Hawaii. It had been about 8 years since I had seen him, so I really wanted to just go hang out last Saturday night, which meant that I was a little late getting to church on Sunday morning, and I knew I would be. So anyway, I was here for the annual meeting, and I was so grateful that Janet Long was our guest preacher, and just the fact that I knew everything was going to be fine. But one of the things that occurred to me at the end of my vacation is there was something kind of unexpected and unique and almost magical that happened in all 3 parts, all 3 weeks of my vacation. Whales. There were whales everywhere. And Isabel, when she was there, had never seen a humpback whale before. And it was so neat listening to her talk about the excitement of seeing her first whales in Hawaii. And they hiked the Kōloa Trail. Some of you may have heard that they were out there during the flood, and the day after they got back, they weren't mentioned in the newspaper. It just said there was 12 or 14 people stranded, and the fire department had to go help them while, I hope it's okay with Polani to tell you this, but anyway, he and Isabel were 2 of those people that had to be rescued and helped back to civilization. And I was waiting with a hot meal for them as soon as they got back. So, but anyway, it was wonderful listening to Isabel talk about whales, and to be seeing whales here on Kauai that week. When I was in California, after the wedding, I had a free day to myself. So the wedding was on a Sunday, and then all day Monday, I didn't have plans until dinner in Carmel, where I was staying with some friends. And so I had the whole day. I hadn't been to Carmel in a while, and I had never been to Point Lobos State Reserve. And I just kept hearing it's a beautiful place. So I spent a good part of the day just hiking. In fact, I think I hiked the full length of Point Lobos. And it's just beautiful California, Northern California coast. And I didn't realize this, but there were tons of whales. Mostly the gray whales, which are known as the mammals that migrate the furthest on this planet. They basically start out in the Arctic Circle and make it all the way down to Mexico, and then they turn around after, they've been down there for the breeding grounds, I guess it's called, breeding and calving grounds, and then they go all the way back into the Arctic Circle for feeding. But anyway, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to see a whale or two? And almost every time I looked out there were whales. And almost every time I came across some people, I said something like, did you see the whales? No, are there whales? And I guess living here in Hawaii, I just know what to look for. But every single person I pointed out the whales to were just filled with joy and excitement, and they were just awestruck. Just like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect to see whales. Look, there's another one. Oh, look at those. And then, of course, I got back to Hawaii, and this is our whale season. So I took my friend John the day before the concert, and we hiked up to the Makapu'u Lighthouse on, past Hanauma Bay, if you know where that is. And I said, there's a good chance we're going to be seeing some whales. And I think it was right after we parked, we started seeing, the sprays, the spouts. And then on the way back, they were breaching over and over and over. And that's something that John hadn't seen before. And of course, there's all these other people, the tourists, that had never seen that before, and a few local people. But it made me realize that no matter how many times I or anyone else had seen whales, when you see a whale breach, you're just filled with joy. You just feel something special, something spiritual, actually. And I thought, oh, I will never get tired of seeing whales breaching. And also, the people that had never seen it before, of course, they're just filled with wonder and joy and awe. And, it occurred to me that every kind of person sensed that deep, deep joy when they saw whales. It didn't matter if they were old or young, people of every color, every ethnicity and race, shape and size. Every single person, when they saw whales breaching, were just taken aback and filled with joy and wonder. And it was almost like nothing else in the world mattered. It was just wonderful. And this past week, as I was reflecting on all of these times that I got to see whales with all different kinds of people, those experiences became a symbol for me of Jesus' message. And today we read from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, what are called the Beatitudes, or the blessings. And as I read those again, and then kind of perused the rest of Matthew's Gospel, it became very clear to me that Jesus' message is that God's blessings are for everyone. It doesn't matter how much you've experienced them before or think you have. Doesn't matter what color of skin you have, what your background is, what religion you are. God's blessings are for everyone. Now, I just want to tell you that when people heard this for the first time, these were radical words. We're used to hearing the Beatitudes. Many of us have heard the blessings our whole life. But for the people in Jesus' day, to hear those words were really, really strange because they went against everything that they had been taught in their society. If you were alive during that day and in that time and in that place, you would have just taken it for granted that the people who were blessed by God are those who hold power over others. The people who are blessed by God are the people who are healthy. The people who are blessed by God are the religious and political leaders. The wealthy people who were just obviously blessed. And then everybody who wasn't a part of that most blessed group, well, they simply were not that blessed. That's what people had been taught their whole lives. And then Jesus comes along. And Jesus said, you know, you've been taught wrong all this time. In fact, what you've been taught goes against God's vision for humanity and God's vision for the world. What you've been taught are not God's values. What you've been taught are pretty much the opposite of all that God stands for and wants you to know. And so Jesus basically took all that teaching and flipped it on its head when he said, blessed are the poor. Blessed are the humble, the meek. Blessed are those who are hungry. Blessed are those who are sick. You see, in that day, if you were of the group that was in control, you were blessed. And if you were the 90-some% of everyone else, you just really weren't that blessed. But Jesus said in his very opening words of his public ministry, we're all blessed. Let's just start from right there. And then Matthew, the gospel writer, spends the whole rest of his gospel demonstrating that very thing. Jesus went all over Galilee, all over Judea, everywhere he could walk, and he not only shared the good news that we're all blessed, but he went around giving even further blessings to one person after another after another. When Jesus was done with the Beatitudes and finished that first great sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, he came down the hill, and the very first thing that Matthew records is Jesus came upon a leper, or a man with leprosy, who knelt before him and said, if you can, I will be made well. I will be healed. And do you know that Jesus healed that man with leprosy? Now, we aren't surrounded by leprosy. So let me just give you just a little bit of background. If you were a person with leprosy, known as Hansen's disease today, but of course in the scriptures it could be almost any kind of skin disease. But if you were one of those persons, you would have been considered just about the least blessed person on earth. Your social, your spiritual, and your physical blessings were all taken away, and for some reason that's what you deserved. That's what you were told by your society. A person with leprosy could not associate with anybody that didn't have leprosy. So you would basically have to leave your family forever, and your friends, and anyone that you ever did business with, and your church. Imagine what that must have felt like when you all of a sudden started noticing spots on your skin, and the powers that be basically said, you're cursed. You no longer share God's blessings. We're going to cast you out of our society. You have to be over there, and you can never enter again unless your leprosy disappears. And as we know, leprosy isn't curable. So here is a man that felt less blessed than probably anybody that Jesus had been in contact with at that time. And Jesus reminded him, as Jesus reminded everybody else on the Sermon on the Mount, that this man indeed was blessed by God. God had not withheld blessings from him simply because he was struggling in life. In fact, on top of that, Jesus gave him an extra blessing. He healed him. Imagine what that must have been like for that man. Just imagine. And isn't that what the church is all about? Isn't that who we are? We're here to remind people, whether they come in this room or we see them after church at a football game viewing, who maybe even somebody that's cheering for the wrong team. We remind everybody that we are all blessed by God. There's none of this idea that some of us are more deserving of God's blessings than others. We are all blessed. And our job as the church is to give those extra blessings whenever we can to whoever needs it, just like Jesus blessed the man with leprosy and everyone else, all those healing miracles that took place in the Gospels. When I got back, actually before I left the island, I think I just kind of was about to start my vacation, I came across Dennis Fujimoto, who is a person who works for the Garden Island newspaper, and most of us, I think all of us that live here, recognize his name. He's the man that we see at almost every event, walking around with a camera and writing stuff down in his little notebook that he keeps in his vest pocket, and always making sure that he's spelling your name right and all that. Well, anyway, I was at the Kauai Society of Artists, just checking out some really cool art. I think it was right after New Year's, and Dennis came up to me and said, "Alan, it's so good to see you. I want to know, what is the most significant event that took place in your life in 2019? And I didn't have to think about it very long. It just kind of came to me like that, and I said, my trip to Molokai with my son in January, and my 3-month sabbatical in Europe. Now, it might surprise you that I would put my trip to Molokai up there with this trip for 3 months, where I traveled in France and Spain and Portugal and Italy and Switzerland. But as I was thinking of 2019, and Dennis asked me that question, I thought back to a year ago, January, where Palani and I went to the Molokai Nature Preserve. Kamako Nature Preserve is actually what it's called, way up in the mountains above Kalaupapa Peninsula. And you have to get a 4-wheel drive to go up there. It's just a very bumpy, windy road, and it takes way over an hour, maybe closer to 2 hours, to actually get to the trailhead. It was incredible. When we got up there and parked, we hiked for the entire rest of the day. Didn't get back until dinner time, but we hiked amongst ohia trees. And many of you know about rapid ohia death on this island and on Hawaii Island. Well, there's no rapid ohia death on Molokai yet, and we hope it stays that way. But I remember at one point I was standing on this ridge, and as far as I could see, there were ohia trees where these bright red lehua blossoms growing on the trees. There must have been thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of these little red splotches everywhere. It was just breathtaking. And then on top of that, the red native Hawaiian birds, the apapane and ki'iwi, they were flying everywhere. It was just like Hawaii was 250 years ago. And Palani and I were the only people hiking there that day. It was just such a special moment. Well, I think it was the next day, we actually went down to the peninsula, Kalaupapa, and we went to the what was known as Hawaii's leper colony. And we did a tour. And I remember thinking about how since 1866, people in Hawaii that had leprosy were put down there in isolation so that leprosy wouldn't spread anywhere. And I thought, how absolutely tragic that these people down here are put on this barren, dry peninsula when there's all this beauty in these mountains that they could actually see, but they couldn't get to. They could never see a lehua blossom. They couldn't get up to where all the people were. They couldn't get to the islands where they were from. And to me, it was just such a tragedy. In 1938, some faithful people of one of the churches there, the Protestant church, they were doing some cleaning and maintenance, and they discovered something really special. I think I told you about this last year, but they came across a vault that was underneath the floor near the pulpit. And they didn't know it was there, and they were surprised, and they opened the vault and pulled out the minutes from the church records from the very first meetings of that church in 1866, the first year that people with leprosy arrived at Kalaupapa. They pulled these out. They were written in absolutely perfect legibility in the Hawaiian language. And I know last year when I shared this with the congregation, I told you that all of those minutes have now been translated into English. And there's a book. And I had actually already ordered that book. And for some reason, it got mixed up in the mail or whatever. And it just came while I was on vacation. So anyway, I cracked it open. I haven't had really a chance to read through it at all. But just this week, I cracked open this book with a description and all the minutes, or many of the minutes, from 1866 on. And as I just kind of glanced at a few different snippets in this book, it occurred to me that the church in Kōloa was there to bring joy and hope to people who believed that they no longer had God's blessing. And the church actually was the blessing for them. And I'm planning on reading that book very soon in 2020, and I'm sure there's another sermon that's going to come out of there. So those of you that are regulars here, you've got that to look forward to, because it's really, really special to go back and find out what was happening in the lives of the people. But again, as I was reading the book, it occurred to me, that's what we are here for as a church. We are here to remind not only ourselves, but everybody, people outside this wall, that they are blessed by God. God's blessings indeed are for us all. And the church is here to be a blessing and to provide blessings for others. Those of you that are members of this congregation will probably know that a year ago we came up with a vision for our church. And the vision is for 3 years, and so we've got a couple left, but part of that vision is outreach. For us in mission, to look in our community, to look on this island, in our state, and in our world, and to look to the very margins of society and to ask ourselves, how can we as a church be a blessing to others? And we identified those who are struggling financially, as well as young people. And those who are struggling with their health. There's 3 special areas to look at for the next few years. But as I tell you that, I want you to know that this is part of God's grand vision that Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount. God wants us to not only share with others that they're blessed by God, that we all are. God doesn't withhold God's blessings from anyone, but that we can actually be a blessing to others. Amen.
Amen.